and welcome back to Beyond the To-Do List. I'm Eric Fisher. This is the show where we talk to the people behind the productivity, not just about being more effective and efficient, but about doing work with meaning and purpose. This week, I have a long-awaited return appearance on this show by Tony Stubblebine, formerly of Lyft, now of the rebranded or restructured, whatever you want to call it, Coach.me. We're going to get into what that is. We're going to get into coaching. We're going to talk about a little bit of retread on habits that we talked about previously when he was on the show, how coaching augments and even accelerates and improves upon habits that you've been working on. We go a lot of other great places in this episode. So honestly, this is one where I already knew halfway through that Tony was going to have to come back again. So we will make that happen. But we talk about priorities. We talk about business culture. We talk about giving yourself permission or trying to get permission or practice. We talk about talent. You can see that, again, we went all over the place. So this is a good one. You're going to like it. Trust me. Hang in there. Well, it is my privilege once again to welcome Tony Stubblebine to the show. Welcome back, Tony.
Eric, thank you so much for having me. I feel like it's my privilege to be a two-time guest.
Awesome. Well, thank you. It has been... Geez, it's been too long. Let's say that first. It's been like, a year and a half or so, and a lot has happened for you and what you're working on and all of that. Let's do a quick recap of what we talked about last time and tell everybody you can go to beyondthetodolist.com and you can find the show notes for this episode, and it'll link back to that old show just in case you hadn't listened to it. But we talked a lot about habits. We talked a lot about Lyft, which has done a facelift, I guess, but more so than that. I think it's underneath the skin. So we're going to talk all about that stuff. But man, you've come a long way.
I think the thing that's really exciting about my work is I feel like I've set myself up to be doing ongoing research into human performance. Like basically for the rest of my career, I get to constantly be refining and evaluating and experimenting and figuring out what works when it comes to elite performance. And we're not talking about professional athletes. We're talking about people in business, people in their own lives and their relationships, and whatever aspect is important to them. How do they reach the next level? And essentially, what I have the opportunity to do is take research that is being done in academic settings and then try to apply it in the real world. And so when I was on the show last time, I was working on a habit tracker that was kind of a community-supported habit tracker where the community would provide a positive reinforcement loop around habits that you were trying to build. And that was all. I think we probably talked about BJ Fogg from Stanford and maybe his BMAT model for designing for your own new habits. And so it's like since then, we've wondered how much deeper could we go? And also, how do we make this a real company? And what we've ended up pivoting into is, one, a new name. We're now Coach.me. And we're kind of a tiered platform for coaching. The free tier is a lot of what was made Lyft so successful. But there's a tier right above that starts at $15 for a personal coach who's dedicated to, to helping you achieve your goals, dedicated essentially to training you to take that next level. And we coach everything under the sun, but the most popular stuff is all productivity and business stuff. And I think that's what we'll probably end up talking about a little bit today.
Yeah. That is an interesting pivot. So I have a few questions about that specifically. Yeah. When I hear the word coach or coaching, I used to think, sports was the thing and it still does to a certain extent pop up with that word. But I think in more recent years, it's been identified with something more like a hybrid of consulting and business mentoring. And it's on more than just the topic or sports or business. It's, how do you define that word coach? How do you differentiate it? Because the word coach isn't just a noun, it's also a verb.
Yeah, right. It's definitely an action. The thing that I think about it, and this is it comes out of our research into really successful people, is that coaching is often the secret weapon of top performers. And the other place you hear coach most often is the phrase executive coach. So it's like just in the title that here is the secret performance hack that's only accessible to the absolute elite in the company, right? The C-level employees. In my company, there's only one C-level employee, me. And I didn't get an executive coach until I'd already been a CEO for several years. And I just always thought that was a little bit backwards. I mean, once I figured out what was going on, I was like, well, why wasn't I being groomed from day one to be in the CEO role so that when I did get here, I was like reasonably competent at my job. And so like, because I didn't have any of that grooming, by the time I actually, and by the way, hopefully everyone knows how to become a CEO. It's the one job. It's the one job you don't have to get promoted into. You can just give yourself the title, right? And so that's like the first time I was a CEO was a company that I had founded, and I bootstrapped it, and I just, I made myself the CEO because I was the only employee. But anyways, like once I got to that job, I was so unprepared for it. And the coaching that I've had afterwards has been such a lifesaver. But I really wish I'd had that from day one, because I always knew that I was going to be, I'm just kind of wired to be ambitious and to, constantly be striving to do more. And I just wish I'd had support all the way through. And I think a lot of people don't think about coaching for themselves because the coaching industry is not set up to coach you when you're 22 or 24 or 28, or when you're like when you're just a staff level employee or you're a first time manager. Really, like, you're not even aware that coaching and mentoring is an option for you until much later in your career.
Yeah, and at that point, you're pretty much just trying to. Well, you may be just naive enough or ignorant ignorant, not in the negative sense, but in the you just don't know what you don't know sense.
Right, in the Donald Rumsfeld sense, you got a lot of unknown unknowns.
There you go. Yeah, great way to put it. Yeah. So how did that decision come about in terms of the transition from Lyft to Coach.me? Was it? I mean, it's more than just a rebranding. I mean, you guys have really just you didn't gut the existing program or setup that you had. You took that and it still exists, where you've got all these props and everything, but you augmented and in fact embellished and improved by adding in this coaching component, which really then became what you really are.
I really don't think we could have even done this if it wasn't for having the foundation we built through Lyft. It's like, it turns out the most powerful thing that we built in Lyft was the community, where we had millions of people who were really aspiring to achieve, like all sorts of goals. And our first wave of coaches, a lot of them we recruited and trained from the Lyft community. So essentially, you could say, I wonder if this person who has a 600-day streak in inbox zero might make for a good productivity coach. And that's actually the exact story of one of our top coaches is that we recruited about 1,000 coaches from the get-go and threw them out, like asked them to bring in their own clients, offered them to our existing community, and then started measuring their performance. And I think this is, to me, one of several amazing things about moving coaching online is suddenly the top coaches just like rise right to the top, because you can see immediately they have different retention rates, their clients have higher success rates. And so that then brought this major surprise. A lot of times these kind of peer mentors who had deep personal experience turned out to be the highest performing coaches. And there's this one guy, Josh Roman, who is like a CTO of a tech company in Boston, but he really likes coaching people on the side. And he really that kind of career transition as you get your first management role, like really resonates with him. And he turns out just by measuring retention, which is a big, easy way to measure the success of coaches, he's like 3 times better than our average coach. And so like that's a person we never would have found if we had just been looking for professional coaches out there in the world, because sort of being credentialed is not a guarantee of being a great coach. And so it's actually that foundational community is like kind of gave us the leverage to go deeper. And I think too, to like take it back to your listeners, last time we were talking about habits, but what is beyond habits? Like at some point, once you have consistency, you want to build up your skill level and go beyond habits. And I think that's what coaching allows us to do, that the old lift kind of stopped at habits, and it was hard to go beyond that.
Yeah, I think in terms of going beyond habits, you've got your habits, you've got them chosen, you've got them, you're consistently working on them, you're getting your props from the community, but only somebody who's maybe working with you one-on-one is going to know your specific situation enough to really give a laser focus to where maybe you really need to improve.
Yeah, our coaches call it spotlighting.
Nice.
The thing is not that the coach is the expert who's going to give you the answer every single day. I mean, it's really a collaboration between the two of you, and almost always actually you, the client, have the best answer inside of you, because you know your situation, but you just might not have considered or been, kind of thought it through. And once you think it through, you're like, oh, well, I should do, X. And so what the coaches do a lot of times is just kind of control that spotlight, kind of push a little bit in the conversation about what to be looking at and what to be talking about. And then the coach is like can often be just your sounding board, and you, the client, are just like, I personally, as a client, I like to be in that situation where like I feel really smart. Although, it can go all sorts of different ways. And that's the thing with Beyond Habits is there's a million different ways that you could grow your habit into, a really strong skill. And I think that's why you can't do it with software. It's why it's really nice to put a human in that role of collaborating with you, because then the two of you can figure out the right path that really fits your personal situation.
Yeah. Well, and you guys have done this kind of pioneering thing where you're really transforming coaching into a digital medium where, you're taking all the positives about this, always on, always connected digital, lifestyle that has become more prevalent, and you're using those pros instead of those cons.
Right. I guess since I've seen both sides of coaching, I grew up in an athletic environment, and I was used to daily coaching, like as a runner, like we were given a training plan, and we like every day of the week had something for us to do. And it was very highly specified. And then when you move into executive coaching, it's the opposite. You meet with your coach once a week for an hour, and somehow that hour is supposed to, affect your entire week, which is kind of crazy. I mean, a lot of times, like things are moving so fast during the week, you don't even want to wait an entire week to kind of get feedback and make adjustments. And so by moving coaching online, we've kind of taken it out of that weekly model and moved it into a daily model, which then, a lot of times like a couple minutes a day is a lot more effective than an hour once a week, because it brings in a really deep sense of accountability. It's almost impossible to forget to do, forget to work on your goal if you're going to be talking to a real person about it. And then you're able to make adjustments every day. And that pace of coaching goes way up, just simply by kind of changing the format from in-person to chat. So most of the coaching happens via, text messaging, essentially. And although the coaches are available for calls, and they'll sometimes do a hybrid, but the default assumption is that you're going to work mostly by, through a chat feature in our app.
Right. That is interesting. I think that when you were talking about that whole idea of we've gotten to that point where coaching is once a week. And, then you've got this 7-day period where, hopefully you can make it on your own and work your plan and, get your homework done and all those different kinds of, imagery that comes to mind when you do that. It's like if you had a college course once a week or something,
Yeah.
It's different if you have that availability. Like the best facilitators, the best, college professors are the ones that are approachable throughout the week, especially through email, where you can ask them a question. Office hours.
We've gotten a chance to really see the experiment, like run an experiment of doing business coaching instead of exec coaching, or call it almost like executive track coaching, starting at the very beginning of a person's career, and do it for an entire staff of a company. And one of the things that I noticed is that I think executive coaching works at the executive level because those people spend a lot of time on strategy, sort of organizational design. And so that exec coach can kind of work you through a really difficult strategy discussion. Maybe that is useful on its own, even if it's only one of 50 things you're trying to get done that week. And then the coach really has no visibility into anything else that's happening for you. But when we work with people earlier in their career, the sort of the balance of strategy versus habits changes. And like earlier in the career, the habits become a much bigger part of the coaching that's going on. The sort of I wanted to talk to you about setting priorities, but yeah. I did, and we talked about it a little bit before the podcast started, but I didn't actually give you the kind of the impetus for it. So as we're talking to, like one of the things we're doing is we're talking to businesses about providing our business coaches to their staff. And so I've been in a lot of these discussions recently, and every manager is saying some variation of they wish their staff was more entrepreneurial. And I don't think they mean like startup entrepreneurial. I just think they mean like they get blocked over trivial things and they can't just figure out they don't like, it's not that they're not smart enough. They're like too rigid to figure out like, oh wait, there's another way we could do this. And and so they say entrepreneurial, they say creative, they say initiative. One company says tenacity. These are all characteristics that they really wish that their employees do. And I think kind of the issue is that if you did well in school, you enter the workforce thinking you're just going to do what's asked of you. And in fact, the work world really wants kind of the opposite. They want you to solve problems regardless of whether or not you've been asked correctly for it. And so a lot of the coaching we do actually starts with set priorities for your day. And it's not just the habit of setting priorities for your day. It's the conversation that goes on with the coach about your priorities. Like, why did you choose that as your top priority? What is the impact to the company if you get it done? What's blocking you from getting it done? And then if you did get it done, did it actually turn out to matter or did it not? And so I think about those conversations as really about training tenacity, kind of helping someone make that shift from top student to, before they graduated to like high initiative, future leader inside of a company. And kind of it starts with a habit. It's really followed on by a conversation. And the whole thing is this word that we've heard over and over again is companies wish they were more entrepreneurial.
I want to take a quick break here to let you know that this podcast is supported by the Art of Charm podcast. The Art of Charm podcast is an iTunes top 50 podcast. It's packed with wisdom in the truest sense of the word from many different topics, including how to create confidence, how to get people to like and trust you, networking, relationships, productivity, time management. And it's fun and funny and educational at the same time. It's personal growth without being boring. It's a show about truly leveling up your life and relationships, friendships, at work, at home, everywhere. And the show offers meaningful, fun, life-changing insights with a practical edge so that you can apply something right out of the box every show. You deserve an extraordinary life. Go to theartofcharmpodcast.com or find The Art of Charm in iTunes or Stitcher and start taking your life to the next level. I still, I think it was about a month ago, maybe, because everybody's using that word. Everybody's throwing around that word, entrepreneur or entrepreneurship, or they're taking portions of that word and splitting it up and adding it onto other words. And,
right.
And I just kept thinking, wait, what does that word really mean? I don't think that I even fully understand it. And I don't know that anybody else does either. And, for some, it just means small business owner. For some, it means like, thinking outside the box, or creator, or manager, or portions of all of the above, really.
Right.
And I think the way it translates into, and, kind of getting around to this whole idea of priorities, for me, it definitely means, often people, when they say, well, I'm thinking about, insert problem here, with an entrepreneurial mindset, what they really mean, I think, is thinking about it with initiative and trying to compose some type of strategy. Does that make sense?
It does, right? Because it is like there's this void, right, of there's a problem and there's no plan to solve it. So, like, who's going to create that plan? And I had an employee once who said, Tony, I've never done this before. I don't know how to do this. And I was like, well, that's great, because I don't know how to do it either. And she was like shocked, right? And that was like a real eye-opening moment, for both of us. And I was like, wow, I need to really remind people that it's their responsibility to figure these things out, because there's no such thing as perfect top-down management. Like, the managers don't know the answer most of the time, and you're putting a lot of pressure on them to guess at the answer when you actually have better information, because you're you're actually in the weeds of it. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's one. The other thing that I talk about a lot is a focus on impact. So I think a lot of people just want to say that they completed the work, like check, like we have launched the project, right? And they want to go home happy and be congratulated for having completed work that meets, it's like went through QA with good metrics, right? But an impact focus is great. Look at, all right, we put that out there, and what happened? Did people use it? People happier because of it? People less happy? Because if that's true, we should just roll it back. And so it's like, and I think this could be true anywhere in the company. Like I've heard people talk about everyone in the company should be the CEO of something. So, like there's definitely kind of really high responsibility things, but you could even imagine at the, receptionist level, what if you made your receptionist the CEO of birthdays, right? So so now you think about that role, CEO of birthdays. This person, maybe they were told, I want you to be the CEO of birthdays, and I want you to remember to celebrate everyone's birthday when they're in the office, right? And so they do that, like they get a card, that's their first thing. And then but if they have the impact mindset, they start wondering, is a card as good as I can do? And maybe I should have a cake. And then maybe I should figure out, when every person is hired into the company, what their favorite cake is. And then maybe I should figure out what their favorite, music is, and that we should have a birthday song and a really fast, quick birthday celebration with music and like all catered to them, right? And so, like, where is that leveling up going to come from? Is it going to come from the boss of the receptionist, or is it going to come from the receptionist? And like, why would it have to come to from the boss, right? It's like these are all things that, like, every person in your company is capable of thinking, oh, we could do this better. We could do this better. And they're just maybe a little unsure, not that practiced at it. Maybe a lot of times the organization is getting in the way. But the hurdles to doing it are almost always surmountable. And so I talk about that impact focus, because I want people to take responsibility for leveling up, whatever it is that they're responsible for.
Yeah, and I think that's that initiative. It's not just initiative to act, but it's also initiative to even look at the situation and analyze it and just, see what it is currently. What is it supposed to be? What's the expectation of it? Who has the expectations of it? Is even because that definitely goes back to the boss. I mean, if the boss is saying to the person in charge of birthdays, hey, I want you to be in charge of birthdays, and that's the final word, like doesn't say, what the expectation of being in charge of birthdays even means, then, they're kind of sitting there adrift with trying to figure out, okay, well, how far am I allowed to go? What amount of permission do I have? Do I even have permission for me to give myself more permission?
There was advice I used to give people I was working at this tech company, O'Reilly, which is mostly a media and conferences business. And advice I used to give people there, people who are sort of considering taking more initiative. I said, hey, listen, the thing to know about this company is this is a company where you'll get yelled at, but you'll never get fired. And, so that's a variant of better to ask for forgiveness than for permission.
Yeah.
So you're going to go oh my God, you spent $100 on someone's birthday and it really should be $50. Someone can just tell you that and then stop spending $100 on people's birthdays, right? That's not the thing that you get fired for. And if you only take initiative on one thing, then you have kind of a weird risk portfolio. But if you're constantly taking initiative on things, you're going to have gotten a lot of things done well, and one or two things that got corrected, which again is a correction is not a firing. It's just feedback. And then you learn from those corrections. And I don't know, a lot of people did struggle with that. I mean, they're really afraid of how far can I take it? And there's always, all right. So this is another thing that comes up a lot in our coaching. Did you read the book Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman?
Yes.
So it turns out that this dynamic that he describes in the book, that your brain has two modes of thought. One, this fast mode, which is largely emotionally driven, is very instinctual, and that's what's mostly going on in your decision making. So, for example, when I leave my office for lunch, if I have not pre-planned a lunch earlier in the day, I go get whatever my stomach wants me to get. That's a instinctual, emotional decision. The other mode of thought is much more rational, and he calls it the slow, the slower of the two modes. And it's effortful, and you really have to work to be in that mode. But a lot of what coaching ends up working on is to take something that's kind of operating at your emotional subconscious level and just pop it up for a moment to your rational level. And so a lot of times this what am I allowed to do, right? Someone will let that sit at their subconscious level being oh, I don't want to get into trouble. I don't want to get into trouble. And they won't do anything. They'll be paralyzed by it. But in fact, it has, in our birthday scenario, it has two really trivial ways to solve that should be could happen instantaneously. One, you could just ask, hey, I want to try this out. I think the budget the first time is going to be $100. Is that okay? Or you could just do it and deal with the repercussions later, which probably are not going to be that bad. So your rational mind, if it spends even 5 seconds analyzing it, will be oh, I should just move forward with it and let me choose one of these two paths. But most often for most people inside of a company, they're kind of sitting on slightly emotional decisions. And I don't know. A lot of people don't even like to think of themselves as particularly emotional. But I mean, it's the reality of it.
Right. I think that it comes to, I think I would say, to put myself in the shoes of that whole birthday scenario, I think that really what's going to dictate whether I go ask for permission, first, what's going to be, there's actually three choices. One is to not ask and not even do anything.
Right.
Then there's the two scenarios, or the two actions you brought up, which is go ask for permission and maybe get a no, or to go ahead and do it and maybe it succeeds, maybe it fails. What I choose for all three of those choices, though, is probably going to be based on what the culture of the company has been like.
Definitely. I mean, a lot of times the culture of the company does get in the way. But I just always feel like it's most likely to be a speed bump than an actual blocker. It's funny. I mean, this birthday thing is like kind of an oddball, like project. I feel like most listeners are not the CEO of birthdays at their company. But I wanted to find something that's like sort of low stakes, because I feel like there's a lot of that in our lives. I know. I think about the time. Just in my own career, there was a moment in which I did take initiative, and I got a ton of pushback for like a week, but then I got promoted over and over again essentially because of that moment. And what it was is I was a software developer on what we would consider now a death march. It's like a deadline had been set, then the project had been given to me with that deadline already in place, and then we would miss the deadline. And then they would kind of give me a new deadline, and I would just do my best to work towards it. And we'd miss that deadline and that deadline. So it's like the original deadline I'd been given was 3 weeks, and we were 3 months past this thing. And then I started scratching my head. I was like, wait a second. Forget this deadline. How long is it really going to take to do this thing? And so I went home on a Friday afternoon, went to the bookstore, bought this book on software development management practices. I think it's called Rapid Development by Steve McConnell, who's like a great writer in software development. And it starts out with this checklist, 37 classic mistakes enumerated. And I checked off 17 of them. And I was like, oh, this project is really screwed up. And so instead of working on the project on Monday, I found a hidden corner of the office. I hid out and I spec'd the entire project out from scratch. Like, what have we done and what do we still need to do? And then one of the things in estimating that you're often taught in projects is, rather than guess at how long something will take, kind of measure it, like convert it into do a point system, and then measure how long it took you to do that number of points in the past, and then project forward. So I went into my boss and I said, listen, I think this project has 180 function points is what I would call it. And it took us, 4 months to do 110. So when you're saying we should launch in 3 weeks, I think the actual number is 3 months. And my boss, or the project manager for this project, was like, that's not acceptable. And he started yelling at me, and I'm just like, no, I did the work. Do you want to look at the math? Right. And so I pushed back on him with this math, and we were really in kind of a heated argument, because he didn't want to go to his boss and say how late it really was going to be. And so I was absolutely going against the grain of this company, which did not have strong project management practices, in which the news I was delivering was completely unwelcome. But then I won, because I was right. I had done the work to back up what I was saying, and no one else had done that work. And it turned out that there was this huge number of people in the company that had perceived that we were working on a death march and that something was wrong, and they saw that I had solved it, right? And so then immediately, promotion a month later, and a ton more responsibility and respect within that organization. And so it turns out this boss telling me, no, this is a firm deadline, we have to get it done in 3 weeks, is not that's not a barrier. That was a small hurdle that I was able to jump over in less than a week. And I think that's a lot of what leadership is realizing that one of the categories of hurdles is your organization, right? But they're always hurdles; they're not barriers.
Yeah. What made you change? What was your perspective change catalyst? What made you think? There's deadlines here, and you just got put in charge of something, what caused you to stop and then decide to get that book and then sit and walk through that?
I know it is like kind of an oddball story in that, like, how many employees are going to be like, wow, my boss doesn't know what they're doing, so I'm going to train myself over the weekend to do it. Right. And by the way, my boss, like that project manager, is a great person, still works at the company, has accomplished a lot there, was just probably put in a position where they couldn't succeed, right? It's sort of, they were, I always say, like, no one comes to work to do a bad job. So it's almost always the organization kind of puts you in weird positions where you're not able to succeed at your best. And I think that's probably what was going on for him. But for me, I think I don't like to be unhappy. And so I was carrying the guilt for this really like late project, and I wanted a way out. And, it's like the way out was quit or figure it out for myself. And obviously, like, I've always had that kind of growth mindset. If we ever talk about Carol Dweck at Stanford, who does all this research on do people think that they have kind of a fixed talent level, or do they think that talent level is something that they could grow? That's a mindset. She calls it a growth mindset. And it turns out that where you fall on that spectrum is, one, it's trainable. A lot of times people with a fixed mindset can be trained to have a growth mindset. But then once you're in that growth mindset, you see different opportunities, you behave differently. And I think I'm really fortunate to have that growth mindset. And I'll tell you, by the way, where it comes from. Dungeons and Dragons.
Nice.
I remember I was playing Dungeons and Dragons in the 80s as a pretty little kid, and my parents were like a little worried. They didn't know anything about it, and they're very liberal. But, they'd read a story that I might be turning into like a little Satanist.
Yeah.
And I always thought, there was a point I thought I was going to be a tax lawyer because I just like really loved rules, right? And I just thought, Dungeons and Dragons and tax law are the same thing. But anyways, in Dungeons and Dragons, you're constantly leveling up. And so that kind of concept is so deeply ingrained in me that I think, I think it's one of the most powerful things that you could, teach your kids.
Well, and you also are constantly running into, I was never a Dungeons and Dragons person, but I'm huge into video games.
Right.
You're constantly running into circumstances where you've got to look at the situation, assess it, and then decide an action.
I have a funny video game observation. I'm watching my 4-year-old or my 5-year-old nephew play video games, and he's always given the sort of hand-me-down Android tablet in his family. And so what that means is that the games all run like kind of slowly on it. And what I have seen is that he's developed this incredible level of grit, which is another kind of soft skill that's a big predictor of future life success. But that grit comes from like he's always dealing with loading screens and crashes. And, it's like me as an adult, like I don't have time for that, right? Like I always want the best hardware, the fastest hardware, because I don't want to waste my life waiting for a slow computer. But it's actually, I'm seeing him with a slow computer. He just has this incredible level of patience and grit. And I went to a basketball camp with him recently. It was a father-son camp, but I filled in for my brother-in-law. And he was the youngest person there. He was the worst basketball player because he'd never played before. But he got there like half an hour early and just put up shot after shot after shot and terrible shots. But he would not give up. And then afterwards, after just really getting destroyed by the rest of the camp, everyone was a lot better than him. Then we stayed for another half hour, practicing more and more and more. And I was like, wow, this was my nephew put in 6 hours of just incredibly focused practice. And I think it actually came from video games.
Wow. Jeez. I can't even comprehend that. That's just not.
I know. I'm the one who dragged him away.
We're missing something there. We're missing something he has. That's so
interesting. People talk about, a lot of times the soft skills are the hardest hardest and most important things to have, but they're also the hardest to figure out how to train for. And so I don't know if we talked about meditation last time. That's sort of my go-to training for soft skills. I feel like meditation is push-ups for the mind, essentially. And so everything that I do in business is better if my brain is in a better place, and that's why I tend to meditate. And but there's probably a lot of different kind of techniques. And I wish more people took their brain to the gym, the way that we take our bodies.
Yeah, that whole idea of, and this is something I need to have. I've been actually looking into getting some people to come back to the show and talk about meditation, because this whole idea that, again, like you just said, taking your brain to the gym. It's not literally going to the gym and taking your brain with you. It's doing reps of importance with your brain, and not like puzzles or crosswords or things like that, but things that almost it work the opposite way on your brain. Like if caffeine was a cheat for your brain, yep, this is the actual building of the muscle for your brain. Yep,
it is. We've helped, I think, now more than 85,000 people start meditating, and then we followed it up by doing research on who succeeded and who failed. And really the biggest cause of failure was a misconception, is that people think of meditation, come into meditation thinking it's about having a calm mind. And so there's nothing push-up like in that. It's just you sit down and then suddenly your mind is completely calm. But in fact, that's a complete fiction. Nobody has a calm mind. We meditate with this guy, William Kabat-Zinn, and his father, basically is the person who created the American mindfulness movement, Jonathan Kabat-Zinn. Anyway, so his son is also a great meditator and teacher in the Bay Area. And he'll tell you his mind is not calm. His mind wanders. That's natural. And the push-up part is actually, if you're doing a meditation where you're supposed to be focusing on your breath, every time your mind wanders, you go, oh, that's interesting. What was I thinking about? And you just name it. Mm-hmm. And then you bring your focus back to your breath. That's one rep. So in fact,
it's not that, and the practice is not to scold yourself for your mind wandering. It's to bring it. It's the practice of bringing it back,
and bringing it back over and over and over again. It's actually I almost wish people counted the number of times their mind wandered, and then we're proud of having a high score, because that becoming aware of what's really going on in your brain is that's what we're talking about with the Daniel Kahneman stuff, the thinking fast and slow. It's the having awareness of the emotional decisions so that you can then take control when that decision is not something your rational brain is going to be happy with. And so each repetition is good. You want as many repetitions as possible. And so if your mind wanders a lot, I think it's totally valid to consider that a good thing. That you're just getting more mental push-ups in that way.
Yeah, I was going to say, some people would say, but why do I want to, for whatever set time I've allocated for meditation, why would I want to rack up a really high number of times my mind wandered instead of, wouldn't I want it to be a really low number like golf, that the score was being lower meant that I was better. But the thing to be proud of is that you have a really high number and that you noticed and brought it back continually.
Yeah. There's times when my mind wanders during a meditation and then it's 5 minutes later before I catch it, right? That's actually, to me, that's the bad meditation. I feel like I didn't do a great job there. And I try never to judge myself, but that's the time I have trouble not judging myself. But if my mind is back and forth, then that's fine. And there's I think there's 3 legs to a meditation. There's the becoming aware of what your mind is doing. There's kind of the control of your focus. And the third is the calming aspect. There is a really a valid calming aspect to it. But I think people put too much emphasis on that when the other 2 are at least equally valuable, if not more so.
Yeah. And I think this really does tie into the whole going beyond habits thing, although you are, I mean, again, by meditating, you're training your brain habit muscle, I guess is one way to put it. But also that idea of choosing your priorities, and in that, okay, I'm sitting here and I am focusing on my breath. That is the thing I have chosen to focus on. That is my priority. And that practice of continually re-choosing becomes then that resource of that mental muscle of re-choosing then is available to you for when you have to re-choose or continually stick to the priorities or reassess them that you've set up in your life.
Yeah, and I think about it's so important in business because you do end up multitasking and or really task switching, right? And so, I didn't do a podcast before this podcast. I was not talking to anyone at all. And so when I walk into this room and kind of set up the microphone, I take a really deep breath and I do like a 15-second meditation, which is really about becoming aware of where my brain still is in the past, what things are, and you're just like kind of saying, all right, I'm still thinking about that email. I'm going to put it down now. I'm still thinking about this lunch meeting I have later in the day. Let me put that down now. Let me get ready to be present for you in this podcast. And then, this podcast is going to end in a couple of minutes. And then now I'm going to rush out the door for this meeting. So I have to be able to not talk about that, not think about that meeting right now, but then also switch into that meeting, basically within, I think I probably have 5 minutes, right?
Yeah.
And I give that credit to meditation. And there's just so many, like I had misconceptions about meditation. And, I thought it was a spiritual practice. My parents were married by their Tai Chi teacher. And so, like, I think of meditation as something from them. That's the kind of, like, California hippie practice that my parents would have been into. And no, now the more I talk to hedge fund managers or athletes, like I actually saw a video of LeBron James meditating on the bench during a timeout. Like he was obviously meditating. Eyes were closed. He was doing these deep breaths, and you're just like, wow. Here we have the best basketball player on the planet thinks that meditation is something that you should do during a game, essentially. And I agree with them, right? And so I've really come around on meditation to think about it purely as a performance practice. And yeah, sure, like you might have a spiritual experience and it's valid to use it for spiritual reasons, but I think there's a lot of people that are avoiding it because they don't recognize how powerful it can be for productivity.
Well, two things. One, I applaud you for actually getting to bring up the NBA in this conversation. Because you had said, we had asked before, I asked you, is there anything else you want to talk about? And you're like, well, the NBA, and I forget what the other one was, but
no,
you did it.
I'm a huge NBA fan. Like, I'm basically a huge sports fan, but when I'm busy, I really have to narrow it down, and I end up narrowing it down basically just into the NBA. And then I'm a Bay Area person, born and raised here. And so for me, my team, the Warriors, who have not won a championship in my lifetime, I think have maybe made the playoffs, 3 times in my adult life, some incredibly low number. They just won the championship. And I got to follow along on that ride, and it was incredibly exciting. But, I'm watching them through a different lens now. The Warriors are famous for having the best shooter in the world, right? Like he set a record for 3-pointers in the playoffs. The previous record was 58. He hit 98, right? Like he practically doubled that record. And so I'm really curious that it's like, I no longer, because of my job and the research that we've done, I basically no longer believe in talent. Like I just think it's 90% how you were coached. And so his dad was an NBA player, which is actually the secret of a lot of prodigies, is that their dad turns out to have been a really good coach. That was Tiger Woods' secret. It was Mozart's secret. His dad was a music teacher. And so they got really good early coaching. So, like, that's what I think about Steph Curry, this, the MVP of the NBA and this great shooter, is that he had great coaching from his dad, and he put in really particular practice. So, like, here's something that I think is really interesting, is that when he practices shooting, he only counts as a make something that's a swish, right? Like if it rattles in, if it bounces off the rim and goes in, that's not a make. So a lot, like when I used to play basketball and I would practice my free throws, anything that went in, I was happy with. But no, his standard, he just set higher standards for himself. And I think that allowed him to have a different feel for shooting than your average NBA player.
Man, that's true.
It. I did. I worked in the NBA basketball.
I don't remember what my second thing was, but I think it probably was something along the lines of, I just can't believe that. Well, obviously, I guess it's obvious it's working. Like he's in the middle of a game and he's outperforming everyone, and yet there on the sidelines, he is meditating and reassessing. Okay, where am I? What's my function now? And what does my mind need to be on now? And then he pulls it off.
LeBron James does that.
Jeez.
Yeah, it's amazing. So is there anything we should give people before we sign off?
I would say, like you said, it's getting coaching as early in life as possible, and even not on a massive, like, let's overhaul your whole life situation, but like Coach, I mean, again, we're not doing a Coach.me commercial, but that it's tooled or tiered towards those individualized weaknesses where you really need somebody to one-on-one step in.
Yeah, I mean, it just really, you can be grooming yourself right now. There's a kind of a like, sounds like a dad joke the more I say it, but it's something I think a lot about. What we've learned about elite performance is there's sort of good news and bad news. The good news is that it's really accessible to all of us. The bad news is we're going to have to get off the couch.
Oh,
right?
Nice.
And it's like whatever it is that you want to achieve, like there is a path to get it, and you might as well, like, it's not nearly as competitive as you might think it is. It's just a matter of doing the right things and putting the right work in. And, honestly, a coach is one of the best ways that you can do that. There's coaches freaking all over. And the trick is finding a good one. And, if you ever end up with a bad one, you just don't stand for that. Just keep switching until you find a good one. And of course, on Coach.me, we're always ranking them. So hopefully we're doing a better job than most places at providing you with someone who is really top notch.
Yeah. And so the key here, and you're going to slam me because it's another dad joke, but is to go from couched to coached.
Yeah, from couch to coach. I've often thought about buying a bunch of couch domains because I think the typo is pretty common.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, no, we should do a podcast, one more later, that's just bad jokes and puns. And,
Tony, it's been awesome to talk with you again, and this will not be the last time you're on the show for sure.
Awesome. I appreciate that so much, Eric.
I hope you enjoyed listening to that conversation as much as I did having it. Like I said in the opening, Tony's definitely coming back on the podcast at some point. Hopefully sooner rather than as long as it took to get him back on this time around. There's lots of jumping off points, lots of twists and turns in the conversation that we could continue to have. So really looking forward to that. You should definitely go check out Coach.me and get yourself from being couched to coached. I still like that. It's pretty cool. Yeah, it was really fun. I really liked it. So let Tony know on Twitter. You can tweet him. Let me know what you thought of this episode. Don't forget to go check out the supporter of this episode, the Art of Charm podcast, another great show where you can listen to people talk about succeeding in all aspects of life and how to do that. You can find them at theartofcharmpodcast.com. You can find them as well in iTunes and Stitcher by searching for The Art of Charm. Thanks again to The Art of Charm for supporting Beyond the To-Do List. Thanks again to you for listening. I'll see you next episode. Beyond the To-Do List is a proud member of the Noodle.mx Network. Find more of our award-winning and award-nominated podcasts to make you think, laugh, and succeed at Noodle.mx. Learn how to podcast. Theorize over the TV shows Once Upon a Time in Wonderland, and Under the Dome. Laugh with our clean comedy, delve into science fiction and philosophy, learn critical thinking from movie reviews, and more at Noodle.mx.